This is the Cameron Journal Podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal Podcast. Today on the Cameron Journal Podcast, I am joined by David Jenyns. He is an entrepreneur and business person who is really good at creating systems to scale people's businesses. One of the biggest problems, ask anybody in the small business world, is growing beyond yourself and then your core team of people, and then getting to a place where you're no longer active in the day-to-day running of your business. I, for myself, never foresee myself ever not being involved. My name's in the name. But for all the rest of you who can escape your businesses, David is here to help you tell you how. So welcome, David, to the Cameron Journal Podcast. How are you?
Pleasure. Yes. Well, who knows? We might light a fire inside you and we'll figure out how we can get you out of the operations.
Yeah, well, it's very hard to have the Cameron Journal without Cameron. Therein lies the problem. But having worked with a lot of small businesses in marketing before I did this, I know how hard that can be. So why don't you before we get into all that, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and your background, and then we'll get into the book.
Yeah, rock and roll. So I also was in the digital marketing space. So I had a digital agency in Melbourne here, and I built that business up, worked pretty much in the day-to-day operations of it for 10 years. And then we found out we were pregnant, and I had that moment where I thought, I don't want to be that dad who's always too busy, who's working late nights, early mornings, weekends. And I needed to figure out how to elevate some of my team. I had a small team around me, but pretty much everything bottlenecked at me. When there was a client problem, it came to me. When there was a new prospect, it came to me. When some fire needed to be put out or challenges with the team, it came to me. So I kind of intuitively knew systems and processes were part of the solution, but for whatever reason, I thought, this business is different. My digital agency is creative and we can't put systems and processes in place because that'll remove the creativity. And I thought, my team's not going to want to follow the processes. And I thought, Google's updating the algorithm all the time. So what's the point of putting in a process if it's just going to get out of date? So I had all of this baggage around why this business was different. And it wasn't until we found out we were pregnant that I said, hey, I've really got to figure this out. And I spent the next 9 months, it ended up being a little bit longer than that, heavily focusing in on, what are the core systems and processes, and elevated one of our team members to become the CEO. And then that was really a big stepping stone for me to step out. I ended up taking a year off, and it just really changed the way that I think about business.
All right. That definitely makes sense. Now, I understand you got into business because you sold a cricket pitch.
Yes.
How did you make the jump from, I guess, real estate to SEO?
Yeah. So it was when I left school, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to take over the world. I thought I was going to be the next Warren Buffett. Tried a bunch of different things along the years. The digital agency was the last business I was involved in, but importing products, running a rock and roll clothing music store, selling the MCG. I tried lots of bits and pieces. One of the first ones was the MCG, where I read a book called The 1 Minute Millionaire, and it told a story of a guy called Paul Hartunian who sold the Brooklyn Bridge. And what happened is they were doing renovations on the Brooklyn Bridge, and he got his hands on all of the discarded wood, and chopped it up into pieces and then sold it off. And the media loved the story. So I just read that story, and then I was driving past the MCG, which the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Australians, we're a little bit sporting mad, and the MCG is almost like the church of sport. So they were doing renovations, and it was like fireworks went off in my brain. I drove past the MCG, and I thought maybe I could get my hands on some of the discarded wood and do exactly what Paul Hartunian did. And that's what I did. I got carpet and wood and chopped it into little pieces. And then I wrote a press release saying, Melbourne man sells the MCG for $24.95. And then I got on TV and in magazines and on radio. And it was like a little promotion. Like I didn't have a proper back end, and I sold a good amount of the MCG up front, but it wasn't really a business. But that was kind of my first real foray into the business world after leaving
No,
school.
that's incredibly clever. I remember when they tore down the old Mile High Stadium in Denver for American football. They sold the seats
Yes.
at like $250 per. They sold out in 20 minutes. People waited overnight in the parking lot, which I'm not a sports person literally at all. I'm like, I can't imagine ever waiting in line for something like that, like ever in my life. But it's incredibly clever though. Like that's really cool.
What's
Yeah, to have done something
funny
like
is
that.
I'm like you. I don't follow sport. So I'm not even a sports fan, and I did this, and I like here's one of the pieces. So that's some of the green seating. For those who can see the video, I'm holding up. It's just a slither. I cut it down into half a centimeter thick, stuck it to certificate paper, and then sold that for $25.
Oh yeah. No, and you'll sell that all day and night. Absolutely. Oh no,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. No, and people will proudly display it in their living room. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't get it, but people do. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't. I definitely don't get it either. But I mean, now for a lot of teams in America, when they redo stadiums, that's become a big business. Is sell
Yes.
off the memorabilia first. That's so in fact, there's a couple of them. They pay for the demolition costs by selling off the stuff inside to people. It's crazy. It's crazy. So no, that's really fascinating. So when we're talking about systems and all this type of thing, you're obviously a very clever person to have come up with that. So why don't you tell us about your book then, Systemology, and what it's all about?
So after the digital agency, I really thought about, well, how did I get myself off the tools, and how did I promote up the CEO? And if I was to do it again, or even to share with someone how to do it, what would those steps be? And that's really what Systemology evolved into. It's like a 7-step process to think about capturing best practice and making a business repeatable. And that way you can delegate tasks to team members. That's not busy work. It's like essential to the way that your business functions. So it's like a Systemology is a 7-step process where it's define, assign, extract, organize, integrate, scale, and optimize. And the first step really is about identifying what are the 10 to 15 systems that are essential to your business, like applying the 80-20 to your business and just thinking, what are the 20% of the systems that deliver the bulk of the result? And we start off by identifying those and really answering the question, if you are going to systemize, where do you start first?
So where does one start first?
So the exercise I use is a thing called the critical client flow. And it's really simple. I mean, you don't even need to buy the book to do this. You just get an A4 bit of paper. In the top left-hand corner, you write your ideal client, like the person you would love to have loads more of. And then underneath that, you go, what is the primary product or service that you sell to that client? And then what you do is on the A4 bit of paper, you map the linear journey from grabbing that person's attention, handling the inquiry, selling them, issuing out an invoice, onboarding, delivering the core product, or getting them to come back. So you literally map that in just little boxes. You don't put more than 2 or 3 words in each box. just to represent what that is. And then that visually maps those essential systems. And if you can get the business to deliver that without any key person dependency, you're well and truly on the path. Now, you can go a little bit further and think about, well, where do you start? Oftentimes it's where in that critical client flow is the most pain, or what breaks if you got 5 times as many customers as you've got right now, or what is something that you as a business owner actively avoid, whether it's conscious or subconscious. And you really focus on going, well, how do we do this? What is the process? What is the checklist? And there's a few rules of systemology, and one of them is you only capture what you're currently doing, not what you would like to be doing. So, and it's really, systemology is about process capture. It's not process improvement. It's just about how are you doing things? Who on your team already knows how to do it well? And then how do we bring everybody up to that standard? And that's kind of the first step.
Yes. Well, and I think also, I don't know if you found this, but I think one of the difficult things, and this was true in the last business I worked at before I started doing this again. It is oftentimes very hard for business owners to empower their staff to do stuff on their own.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there's a human element to it that I think is very important.
Yeah, and there's 2 or 3 pieces, like a lot of what we talk about with systemology, really, in the grand scheme of things, if you add it all up, it's actually about building a systems culture. So, I mean, we give the steps on exactly do this first, do that second, because that helps to build momentum, helps to get some evidence in the organization that, hey, this is the way that we do things here. Ultimately, what you're looking at doing is to change that behavior of team members and also demonstrate that behavior right up front when you're recruiting and onboarding. So when new team members come into the organization right from day dot, they realize, this is how we do things here. And then it's much easier. Like, it's harder to change habits and people stuck in their ways if they've been in a position for a really long time. That's the hardest bit. But for new team members, if this is all they've ever known and this is how we do things here, then if they're not the right fit, they'll opt out early. So a big part of the work that I do is at least, getting over that first hump, and then how do we get some structure in place so that we start to build more momentum?
Yeah. Well, no, that definitely makes plenty of sense. So I get the impetus for why you wanted to get out of the agency, but what do you do now? Did you get back involved once your kids were older, or how did that work?
I ended up finding, because I took a year off and I kind of lost the passion for digital marketing. Like, I kind of, with that perspective, I used to love it, on the cutting edge, consuming as much as I could. The landscape's always changing, always something new to learn. I was very much the go-to guy in our company because I was right on it. But it kind of, I don't know, I just, fell out of love with it. And then I started to think, well, what do I want to do? And I love helping business owners. I mean, that's why I got into the digital marketing in the first place. And then I realized that this problem of getting the business owner out of the day-to-day operations is a big one. It's often experienced in all small businesses, and some people never get past it. So I thought, well, I'm going to go to work on this problem. And Melissa, who was the lady I promoted to CEO, she ran the digital agency for 3 years without me. I'd basically meet with her every quarter and she would run the day-to-day. So that kind of gave me the confidence. And it wasn't until she's in Australia, but all of her family's back in the US, and she had to move back to the US for some family stuff. And she came to me after about 3 years and said, look, I got to move back. And I was like, oh, well, I don't really want to jump back in the agency. And that's when I ended up selling the agency. And that was another moment when it reinforced the importance of systems, because I was like, if I want to sell this and someone needs to take it over because I don't want to step back into it, like, where's the value here? And the guy who ended up buying it, I sold it to a guy in Cairns. The reason he bought it for two reasons. One, the financial performance, and the second were all the systems. And he said, you haven't worked in it for a few years. It's managed. The money that it spits off afterwards is profit, where you're not actively working for it. So I want to buy those systems. And then again, I went back to, if I didn't have systems and Melissa left, I can only imagine where I would have been. Like, I wouldn't really have had a saleable asset, and I would have had to have gotten back on the tools. So that was another moment that made me go, hey, this whole idea of systemization is really important because it gives business owners options. Because a lot of business owners don't have options. They have to work in the business. And that's okay if you love it. But I think it should be the business owner's choice to work in it, on it, out of it, onto the next project. Like, it should be up to them.
Yes, well, and it's a difficult I think it's a difficult transition to operationalize and systemize things. I'm going through that right now. I just introduced automated podcast scheduling this year. Um, and in fact, I was remarking before we started recording that we had scheduled you a long time ago, and so I had to be like, "Who are you? Who are you?" Um, let me figure out who this person is. And I'm starting to develop, rather than having a lot of emails back and forth, it's like, here's the scheduling link, here's the be a guest link, read and schedule yourself, and I'll see you then, sort of thing. And so so rather than everything kind of being a little bit ad hoc, things are starting to get more standardized. Because right now I'm on my own, but I'm not going to be for very much longer. I will probably hire at least one other staff person within the next 12 months. And so this stuff has to get standardized for that time. And I think for me, the biggest thing, and I don't know if you found this yourself, it's such a mindset shift. Like, it has been a huge mindset shift for me to, one, kind of let go a little bit of the control when it comes to scheduling. Which I used to enjoy, but also to to kind of get used to the whole idea of things being standardized. It's been a huge mindset shift for me. Was there any big shift for you?
Yeah, look, I think a couple of steps after you identify what the essential tasks are. So let's say in your example, it's podcasting, and there's probably a whole range of tasks related to podcasting. Then recording yourself doing the task is kind of like a first part of it. And maybe you just record yourself and put it in a Dropbox and think in your head, hey, someone's going to do this later. I need to create some resources that make their job easier. So when you do get that assistant on board, they can watch, 5 or 6 short videos of you scheduling someone. And then you can say to them, hey, I want you to watch these. And when you do it, create a little checklist for yourself and for the person who might come after you. Because as we grow, you're going to delegate down, and you might get new responsibilities. So the big mindset shift is always, for me, thinking, how do I move on to higher quality problems, and how do I stop solving the same thing and again and again and again? If it's the same thing over and over.
Oh, yes. No, I'm a big fan of a checklist. Yes, I'm a big fan of a checklist. And like all the little, steps and things, are like uploading episodes, which for me, because of video now, involves uploading to 2 different platforms, and it's all very complicated. And and descriptions. Yeah.
It's that mindset of this at some point needs to be delegated down, and you're doing the task to pave the way, but always thinking someone's going to take this over after me, and how can I make their job that little bit easier? So that's one of those big mindset shifts that I have in my head as I do it.
Well, and I think another aspect of it, and I don't know if you found this as well, but I also find it's finally investing in the tool or the website or the program that makes something easier. Because I don't, for me, it's kind of like oh, well, I don't need that. I can manage along, like I'll figure it out, all this type of thing, And when I started doing this in 2014, I, literally had less than $1,000 to my name per month. I was renting a room in somebody's house. So I've always been that way. And sometimes rather than making someone else go through that super tedious thing that has secretly been pissing you off for years, but you've learned to put up with, it's like, no, go finally go out and buy the thing that fixes this whole problem and makes it way easier for someone else. Like, just spend the money at some point. It's because it's not worth it, at some level.
Yes, yeah. And look, one of the first things we do, and it depends on where you're at. I mean, Systemology works really well if you've got a small team around you and you build up the capability in the team. If you're just solo, I actually suggest making some minor tweaks and modifications to the way that the process works, because when you've got a small team around you, sometimes the best thing to do is to just go, how are we currently doing this? So Cameron is currently scheduling this way and he communicates with someone. Great. Well, let's record him doing that. And let's just get one of the team or a virtual assistant to just do it that way, because Cameron does it pretty well and they can just step in and take it over. The good thing about that is it doesn't really require a huge amount of thought. You're not re-engineering, you're not finding a better way, you're not doing anything like that. So if you've got a bigger team, that's what you would do. You just go, well, what is Cameron doing? Great. Okay. Now, Jenny, you look at this. Now you take that over and Cameron's now going to be freed up to do something else. But when you're smaller and you don't yet have that ability, yes, making those little tweaks of going, where is my time getting consumed here? This is frequent and regular. It's part of the way that I do things. I'm going to have to keep doing this until day in and day out. If I can find a tool that then helps me to solve that problem or cut it from, 30 minutes down to 5 minutes to organize, and I do this multiple times every week, well then, yes, getting that right tool makes sense. But obviously changing to a tool takes time. You got to find it, research it, test it, figure out the new way. And that's really where the business owner actually does the work, their best work. The best work is finding new stuff, figuring it out and deploying it. It's not the best use of the time if it's very repetitive work that they're not adding any value or doing any unique thought or anything creative. In those situations, you're better off just saying, well, what am I doing? How do I systemize it? And then how do I get someone to do it?
Well, yes. No, this is so good because this is at the center of where I am. And I know there's a lot of other people because I interview so many business leaders and all this type of thing. And this is not a subject we've talked about a lot. And so I know there's so many people out there. Like I said, I've just worked with so many small businesses where it's just kind of like, oh my goodness, we could put systems in place and really kind of, get you out of here sort of thing. And so this is so vital and so important. So
there's a few things that hold business owners back. Like sometimes they think I'm not a systems person, or I'm not big enough to systemize just yet, or I tried this in the past and it didn't work. And some people like you go, yeah, I love checklists. I do that. There are other business owners who are the opposite and they think I'm not a process person. And it's trying to navigate through that and figuring out what are their biases and how do we make it easy for them. Again, once you start to get momentum, the business owner is oftentimes not the best person to be doing the documenting of the process. Oftentimes you record them doing the task, maybe, but then you give it to someone else who then watches it, creates the checklist, and then goes back to the owner and says, hey, I watched your videos. Here's the 10-point checklist I put together. Does this look right? Did I miss anything? And it's little tweaks like that that make the process more efficient and moves it from, in the business owner's head, from I can't do this to, you know what? I can do this. This is within my realm, and it gets the business owner focusing on what they're good at, not necessarily, I hate documentation, that if they hate it, well, let's get it off their plate and find someone who can help them do it.
Yeah, no, that definitely no, I've worked in trying to take a large base of knowledge of a lot of people and turn it into something that's not dependent on people to use anymore. Um, and that and it's definitely a process. There's definitely people who, knowledge is power. People don't want to give that up. All this type of thing. And that's true for business owners as well. I've had clients like that,
Yeah.
that keep kind of being the repository of all the knowledge is how they maintain control in the business sort of thing. And those are the clients I tended to step away from, to be honest, because I knew I
Yeah.
couldn't help them. I'd gone as far as I could go, sort of thing. And so it was time to move on. Um, and so there's all these
That
kind of competing things.
that point there is a really interesting one because it's very common for the business owner and also for the staff. So some staff create this little black box around them where they're the only person who knows how to do the thing. And they do that for job security so
Mhm.
that you can't get rid of them because you don't really know what Jenny's doing. And someone's got to do that task. And if nobody knows, so Jenny feels like she's creating job security. So this is part of that idea of changing the culture in the organization, helping team members know, if we document your process, this is not about making you redundant or firing you or getting another team member or moving your job offshore because now we know what you're doing, but rather when you systemize, you actually make yourself more valuable to the business. Because what ends up happening is if you document some of these recurring repetitive tasks, now you're freed up to do these higher value tasks that only a more skilled team member can work on. So and not everybody on the team can take ideas, codify it, systemize it, and delegate it down. So it's actually a way to get promoted in our organization, or that's a suggestion I suggest people put forward to the team is this is how you actually move up in the organization. Now, it doesn't work with everybody, but it's definitely something to be mindful of when you're recruiting new team members. You want to avoid black boxes. And then over time, like you create this systems culture. If there already are existing black boxes, you need to see will they transfer or won't they? Because if they're not going to adjust to this new open, transparent way, then are they the right fit for the direction of the organization? And I know that's sometimes hard to think about, especially if it's the business owner, like you said. But definitely other team members, when you introduce systems culture, not everybody connects with it because it's open, it's transparent, there's nowhere to hide. You got to do the work, and you're doing the work that you're doing out in the open.
Well, yes, and that I mean, having been in a couple organizations who'd been around for a long time, that oftentimes a lot of those staff member attitudes are the product of previous, oftentimes very toxic leadership. I had a couple of those where there was people who acted that because they were hired under so and so, and that's how they did things back then. And I've watched new leadership come in and have to break those habits and break those things, and not everybody survived. And you know and it's so it yeah it's definitely, but I mean, but that's so but this is such an important conversation because this is what separates the small under 50 employee business from the 50 to beyond business, is
Yeah.
what you're talking about. This is, if you want to grow beyond a team of 5 to 10, you have to do this. Like, this
Yes.
is it.
And it's
And
funny,
I say that as
most,
myself. I'm a guilty party too.
yeah,
I'm in the middle of
yeah,
operationalizing and standardizing so that the Cameron Journal can run without me doing it every day, because that day will come. I know my name's on the logo, but like maybe one of these, I'll just be talent around here. I'll come in, record a thing, and go home. And other people will be
yes,
responsible for all the rest of it. And it's
yes,
hard, it is, but
yeah,
this is so important for like business growth and getting out of the day to day, especially if you want to spend time with your kids and your family, which is how you started. So it's so important.
yeah. And a lot of like I feel like it's for small business, it's one of the least addressed areas. Yet, as we
Absolutely.
said, it's absolutely critical. And most of the work done in this space is done with big business in mind. So when you think of systems and processes, if you're in that space, you think of Lean and Six Sigma and some of these process improvement methodologies, which work really well. When you've got a production line or you've got hundreds of employees and you've got process that you're looking to improve. But when you're in a small business and you don't yet have a process and you haven't yet figured it out or got it out of your head, that's the area I've been focusing, because I feel like that area is so underserviced and so poorly misunderstood. Yet, as you clearly articulated, that it's the bridge to grow. Like, you can only grow so big when it's you and small team members, like a small team around you. Then you hit this glass ceiling. And what makes it hard to break through the glass ceiling is all of the skills that you've developed to grow up to a small team are the skills that end up holding you back for that next leg, because you needed to micromanage. You had to be across everything. You needed to understand the process inside and out. You were doing a lot of the work. Whenever things needed to be done, if someone's off or whatever, you could step in. So all of that behavior has been reinforced to grow a business up to 10 staff. But then it's that same behavior that helps hold you or gets you stuck to then move beyond that, because there has to become a point where you delegate, where you pass on some of these tasks, where you step back, where you capture the way that you're doing things. And it's a very different mind shift. And again, that's why most business owners, small business owners, get stuck. That's why they never grow beyond themselves or a team. That's why they still do everything, because that's all they've ever known. So it's very hard to change the picture in their head of what they know.
No, and that's why I was saying earlier, it is a mindset shift. You really have to change the way you think about your business, all this type of thing. I recently I was having a conversation yesterday with one of my partners. I recently transitioned my book business to a small press, a small independent press in Wisconsin. And we're very excited to work with them. And she literally said, your time is too valuable to be doing book layout and dealing with all the distribution stuff and all the marketing stuff. Your time is better spent, I don't know, writing books, the part that they can't do, the part that just not anybody can do.
Yeah.
And it's been a huge, and I will say it has been hard. My leadership style is I'm the person who, my name is on the paperwork, but I will also vacuum the rug. I mean, I used to do major events. I used to do nightlife promotion. I did the first full length fashion week in Denver Fashion Week 2012, which is now a huge fashion event because I sold it and all of its processes and connections and everything. I kind of packed in a box and sold it to somebody. And I'm that hands-on type of guy. I like to kind of see it all going.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard for me to just kind of pack up all the files and send them off to some people and be kind of like, well, here's my life's work. Don't screw it up. Like, it's hard. But the fact is, my time is better spent. I don't need to be doing that anymore.
There's like, you're speaking right to the problem that a lot of business owners struggle with. And I'm the same. Like, I'm a helper, and if something needs to be done, just because of my position or whatever in the organization, I don't ever feel like I'm below doing certain tasks. If something's got to be done, it's got to be done, and I'll get to it. So we're very much on the same path there. Well, one thing that I've done to help shift my mind on this a little bit is understanding by, depending on what the task is and when I step in, I'm actually disempowering the other team member and not giving them the opportunity to solve the problem or to level up. Because I'd love to help the team member, and I'd come to me with a problem and they'd say, oh, this needs to be done. And I go, oh, that's okay. I can do it. And that's really what happened in the digital agency. But the mindset shift became, well, what's the system for that? Like they'd say, hey, I've got this problem. And then we go, what's the system? And then we'd have a look at the system. Is there a system? Yes or no? And if there is a system, did we follow the system? Did something break down on the system? Do we need to tweak the system? And it was just changing the way. I was still there to help staff. And if someone came to me, it's not like I'd turn them away and say, hey, that's your problem to deal with. But I'd try and help them solve it in a way that was systems focused, empowers them and helps them to solve that problem themselves in future. And that was part of the shift in the culture. And it's a hard one for business owners like me who love to help. Because, I want to see team members do well, but I really had to realize that if I kept stepping in, I'm actually making them dependent on me, and dependent relationships aren't also healthy relationships.
Well, and it also does. And I worked in another business where this was true. You never give the staff a chance to figure it out on their own, solve it on their own, sometimes make a mistake. I was working in an auto business that was ran by a master German mechanic who has been working on cars since he was a child because his father was a master mechanic. And he would, because his guys were, decades younger than him, didn't have the experience, was always sort of undercutting them. And so everybody got used to him doing it and telling them what to do. And there was kind of this just passive inertia in the shop and the sort of this expectation of this. And I was kind of like, and he would, of course, complain, as is typical. He would complain, why don't they do more? Why? It's like, well, you haven't created a system where you allow them to do it. Like you haven't created a condition under which they're able to figure something out and have you actually trust and believe that they will. They're just used to you coming in and fixing it or complaining about what they've done or complaining the fact they're not fixing it themselves and all this sort of thing. And so, yeah, I think that staff empowerment piece is so important because nothing will break down an organization faster than a staff that is sad, disempowered, who feels like they're not allowed to think for themselves or anything like that. And you get apathy, performance falls, revenue falls. It has all sorts of deleterious downstream effects.
And I reckon it's funny, it almost feels counterintuitive when you think about systems and processes because there's this picture in our head. Oftentimes when people think of a systemized business, they think of McDonald's. Now, McDonald's has been systemizing for 60 years. They're a hamburger business. They recruit 15-year-old kids who know nothing about business or burgers or working, and they try and teach them up to learn how to flip hamburgers. So obviously their systems and processes are going to have to be over systemized to nth degree because they've got people who have that zero experience. So business owners think, well, that's the way that you create a system and a process. And what ends up happening is people over document, over systemize. Their business might be different where they're recruiting great team members, but now they're telling them how to suck eggs and then they go too far. So there's this fine line. And I remember hearing an interview with Reed Hastings from the Netflix. And when they started systemizing their business, they said, we wanted to dummy proof our business. So we systemized everything down to the nth degree. But then the only problem was only dummies wanted to work here. And so what he learned is there's this balance. There's certain things that you want to systemize, the routine and things that need to happen a certain way. But then that should create space for creativity and for your best team members to do some of their great work and the ability to innovate. And so there's a real art and science in building this culture around, we don't just document for documentation's sake. We document assuming we're going to have smart people. This is not about telling them to left click and click file and open. And like that just sounds so painful for anybody. And some tasks it needs that level of detail, but a lot of tasks it doesn't. So it's understanding that nuance in the system is another very challenging thing for business owners as they introduce systems culture.
No, that's even true in something that's highly systemized like automobile manufacturing. that ability, that's one of the ways automation is really hard in the automotive industry, is it's very fixed. Like once you've kind of programmed it and set it up, you're stuck with it. There's not a lot of room for on the fly changes, which they still ironically need to do. Even something that's so systemized and operationalized as this has been for 100 years, like, all this type of thing.
Yeah.
Mercedes-Benz actually reduced automation in their factories because they had so many options on their cars. If they wanted to make a change, like, yes, this door panel, but not that door panel, or these door handles, but not those door handles, the machines got confused by all of this. But you could just tell the people, this door panel, not that one, these handles, not these ones. And people would just be like, oh, okay, and just sort of do it. And so they actually backed away from automation because the people were just more flexible, sort of thing. So there is such a huge fine line there. Even in a company as huge as Mercedes-Benz, had to figure that one out the hard way. So take heart, everyone.
Yeah.
So,
and it's this constant ebb and flow, and what's changing and what's needed by the customers, and where is the customer seeing value, and how do we continually try and optimize the process to maximize the value that we're delivering through to the customer. And if Mercedes-Benz has decided that customizing the doors and these other options are really, really important, and now that they've increased that range because that's the way they deliver maximum value to their customers, that they've decided, well, now they need to think, well, what is the most efficient way of delivering that? And they've kind of had to rejig things and go, well, you know what, the old way of complete automation wasn't working with this. So it's that growing and evolving and understanding with systems and processes and business, it's never done. Like, you don't reach a point where you go, woohoo, we've all systemized. This is constant and never-ending improvement.
No, absolutely. Well, we've reached that part of the show. I have to go because I have my news hour in 15 minutes. So we've reached the part of the show where we do plugs. So why don't you let us know where people can buy the book and where they can find you online?
Yeah, best place is Amazon. So head over to Amazon. If you're looking at the video, I'm not too sure, but I'm holding up the book. It's just SYSTEMology. If you search that, if you're listening to this, you're probably an audiobook person. So it is on Audible as well. And then if you want to go a little bit further, our website, systemology.com, where I've just got a YouTube channel and some other resources that can help.
Yes, excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for that. Always love chatting about systems.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter. And we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.